Let's start with the red blood cells among the cells among the formed elements. Red blood cells are erythrocytes, which means red, right? Erythro means red and cytes means cells. So red blood cells are biconcave discs, so almost like donut shaped with not a donut hole, but there is like a little depression here. And it has no nucleus, no organelles. It is just filled with hemoglobin and also contains another protein called as spectrin, which kind of helps it to twist and turn, right, to give it flexibility so that they can squeeze through the tiniest capillaries. So basically, they are made up of hemoglobin. They're bags of hemoglobin. And they're shaped like this instead of being shaped as a sphere, so that every hemoglobin, which is present here inside the red blood cell, is capable of picking up oxygen molecules. They have ability to, so you don't have like a sphere, and suppose you have hemoglobin right in the middle of that sphere, it will not have the capacity to combine with oxygen. So the structure fits its function. Okay, so this is a complementarity of the structure and function. Anyway, so these hemoglobin molecules which are inside the red blood cells, these are basically designed to carry oxygen. So each hemoglobin molecule can carry up to 4 oxygen molecules. Each red blood cell contains about 250,000 hemoglobin molecules, and that's about 1,000,000 oxygen molecules that one red blood cell can pick up, right? So we have plenty of oxygen. Okay, though they are rich in oxygen, though it contains, it's picking up, it's made up of oxygen. Hemoglobin, red blood cells themselves do not use oxygen because they don't have any organelles, they don't have mitochondria, they don't break down glucose in the presence of oxygen. So it is purely just oxygen carrying bags, right? And once they get old, like in 3 to 4 months, they die and they're replaced by more red blood cells. So they do not have cell machinery like normal cell machinery. So they are not really cells. They're not considered true cells, and their lifespan is very limited, about 3 to 4 months. Okay. Erythrocytes are a major factor for blood viscosity, and the number of red blood cells determines the blood flow. So if you have very viscous blood, then it is going to move slower, right? Because it's a thicker liquid. If the red blood cells are lower, for example, if you have anemia, then the viscosity is going to be low, and that is going to cause the blood to flow much faster. People who are inclined to have clots, they are given blood thinners, right, which lowers the viscosity, meaning that the blood can flow much faster and easier than people with viscous blood. So that's one of the functions of blood thinners, right? Now let's go into the structure of hemoglobin. So as I said, each red blood cell contains about 250,000 of these molecules. So let's look into this molecule. Hemoglobin is made up of 4 protein molecules, which are called as globin. Okay, so we have 4 globin polypeptide chains, and each of these polypeptide chains contains in the center an iron molecule, Fe molecule. Fe is the one that picks up oxygen, not the globin. Okay, so iron combines with the oxygen, forming oxyhemoglobin. So this is also called as heme. So heme, right? And that is what gives the color, red color, to the blood. Globin, there are 4 globin molecules. There are 2 alpha and 2 beta chains, each bound to a heme group. And it is contained within a red blood cell. Red blood cell contains the hemoglobin 1 to prevent them from being fragmented and avoid being leaked into the capillaries. Suppose we have these 250,000 molecules released into the bloodstream, that is going to increase the osmotic pressure tremendously, right? As we saw earlier, the blood osmotic pressure doesn't depend on the size of the molecule, but it depends on the number of molecules. So we are very blessed to have red blood cells which contain the hemoglobin. So we get to get a lot of oxygen, and at the same time we don't increase the blood osmotic pressure because they are contained within the red blood cells. So here is another picture of a hemoglobin with 2 alpha and 2 beta chains. So this is how red blood cells look like. Okay, so these are the erythrocytes. Okay, so oxygen loading takes place in the lungs and it is transported to different tissues. So what is oxygen loading? When the blood picks up oxygen, that is called as oxygen loading. When it delivers oxygen to the tissues, it's called as oxygen unloading. And when it picks up carbon dioxide, that is called as carbon dioxide loading and unloading. When oxygen binds to the iron, it turns it like really red in color, ruby red in color. That is called as oxyhemoglobin. When it unloads the oxygen, then it doesn't have any more oxygen. It's dark red in color, and that is called as deoxyhemoglobin. Okay, and oxygen is not replaced by carbon dioxide, meaning carbon dioxide doesn't attach to the heme. Carbon dioxide attaches to the globin molecules. Okay, so about 20% of the carbon dioxide is transported by the globin of the hemoglobin, and it attaches to the globin instead of the heme. When carbon dioxide attaches to the globin of hemoglobin, it's called as carb-amino-hemoglobin. Okay, so meaning that it is attached, the carbon group is attached to the amino part, that is the globin part of the hemoglobin. So carbon dioxide loading occurs in the tissues and carbon dioxide unloading happens in the lungs. So we will talk about a little bit more when we do the respiratory system about loading and unloading of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So we see that there is no competition between oxygen and carbon dioxide because they are attached to different places, and about 98% of oxygen is transported by hemoglobin. Only about 20% of carbon dioxide is transported by hemoglobin, right? Oxygen is attached to the heme and carbon dioxide is attached to globin. Okay. Let's look into the production of erythrocytes. So the production of red blood cells is called as hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis. And this happens in red bone marrow, which is made up of reticular connective tissue and sinusoids, which are leaky capillaries. Within the capillaries, so you have immature blood cells, and this is normally found in the bones of axial skeleton, girdons, and proximal epiphyses of humerus and femur. Okay, so these are immature blood cells, and these are called as hemocytoblasts. So the stem cell for all kinds of cells in formed elements, whether it is red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets, they all have the same stem cell called as hemocytoblast. Okay, and this cell then divides as per whether the body needs red blood cells or white blood cells or platelets. Then it converts to another cell which is called as a committed cell. Once it changes to the committed cell, then it cannot change into any other kind of blood cell, right? And once they mature, once they are produced, they migrate to the sinusoids, which are leaky capillaries, and then from there they can enter the blood. Okay, so let's look at the picture of erythropoiesis. So we have hematopoietic stem cell or hemocytoblast that is converted into erythrocyte CFU or colony forming unit. That starts dividing the cell into precursor cells, which are called as erythroblasts. Blasts means immature cells. And these cells are still normal cells with the nucleus, with all organelles. They convert themselves to a precursor of red blood cells called as reticulocytes. Reticulocytes are then, they enter the bloodstream and then they are converted into mature blood cells. So reticulocytes, so conversion of hemocytoblast to reticulocyte takes about 15 days. Right? So reticulocyte count gives an idea of the rate of RBC formation. About 0.5 to 1.5% of the circulating RBCs are reticulocytes. So if there are too many reticulocytes, more than 1.5, that may indicate some kind of polycythemia. If it is less than 0.5, that indicates anemia. So you can read through this. So this is again explaining how this is formed. So how is it regulated? How does the body know that it has to produce red blood cells? So the count is very, very important, right? And mainly the body reads how much oxygen is there. So if the oxygen level goes down, whether a person is anemic, suppose a person moves from Houston to, say, Colorado, right? So the air pressure decreases, so oxygen levels are lower there. Body doesn't know that. So body can read it as, okay, low oxygen content, then it starts producing the hemocytoblast, which is going to get converted to red blood cells. Okay, so, and that is all done by a hormone called as erythropoietin. And erythropoietin is also called as EPO. Okay, so when the oxygen levels fall down, then kidneys release EPO, which enhances the production of erythrocytes. So it can be, again, the erythropoietin can be produced by the drop of oxygen, whether it is loss of red blood cells, reduced levels of oxygen in high altitude, increased demands as an aerobic exercise, reduced hemoglobin. No matter what the cause is, it is going to read how much oxygen is there, and that is going to cause the production of red blood cells. The cause doesn't matter. So when you have less amount of oxygen, which is called as hypoxia, that is going to induce the kidneys to produce erythropoietin, which stimulates the bone marrow to produce, stimulates the hemocytoblast to produce red blood cells. Once more red blood cells are produced, oxygen levels increase, then this is going to stop. Okay, so I like this picture too, so you can take a look at that. Homeostatic imbalance may be dialysis patients, because for them kidneys are not working, so they cannot produce erythropoietin, and for them they have to they have to be injected EPO periodically. EPO abuse was done by athletes who used to inject it just before performance to increase the red blood cells. That is called as secondary polycythemia. That is also called as blood doping, which is banned by Olympic committee. Anyway, so how are the red blood cells destroyed, right? We said that they live for about 3 to 4 months. And once they get old, then they are taken into the liver or spleen or bone marrow, and the hemoglobin is broken down. Hemoglobin is broken down into heme and globin. Globin is protein, which is taken back into the bloodstream and recycled. Heme is iron. So this is stored as ferritin or hemoseridin, and it is bound to transferrin, and again, it can be reused. Some of the heme is converted to bilirubin by the liver, okay, which is a part of bile. Once that is used for digestion of the fats, then it is taken into the, it is used as bile and then converted into something called as stercobilin, and that is excreted into the feces. So stercobilin is the compound which makes the feces look yellow in color. So people with liver disease, they do not produce stercobilin, and hence their stool is white in color. All right. And the main production of the red blood cells are iron, amino acids, iron, B12, and folic acid. Okay, so these are important minerals and nutrients that are required to produce red blood cells. Men require about 0.9 milligrams per day, women about 1.7. Low absorption rate of iron requires consumption of 5 to 20 if there is somebody who's not absorbing iron properly. So you can read through this. Erythrocyte disorders can be classified as anemia or polycythemia. Anemia is low red blood count. Polycythemia is too much of red blood cells. So anemia is just a general term for anybody who has low oxygen carrying capacity. So it could be insufficient number of red blood cells, it could be low hemoglobin count, or it could be abnormal hemoglobin. So when we talk about the low red blood cells, it could be hemorrhagic, somebody is having blood loss, and it could be acute, it could be chronic, like hemorrhoids or internal ulcer. It could be hemolytic anemia or aplastic anemia where bone marrow is destroyed, or red blood cells die young, right? So this could be maybe chemo or radiation or medication or infection, something like that. That is hemolytic or aplastic anemia. Low hemoglobin, iron deficiency, right? That's the most common kind of anemia. And when the food has low amounts of iron, it causes red blood cells to be small and pale. These are called as microcytes. Okay, they can be cured by iron supplements. Now, as opposed to this, there is an autoimmune disease called as pernicious anemia. It is caused by deficiency of B12. Okay, so this is common in vegetarians who don't have enough. Uh, B12 is taken by the from the food into the intestines with the help of something called as intrinsic factor. B12 is very common in meats, right? Though these are all water soluble. This is commonly when any kind of meat contains it, but vegetarians often do not get that. Okay, so two things are important for this for causing pernicious anemia. One is B12 by itself. And B12 is such a big molecule that it requires intrinsic factor, which is produced by the stomach, to be taken into the bloodstream. So two things can happen. One is it happens in vegetarians whose diets do not have B12. It also happens in older people, okay, whose system does not produce, their stomachs are not able to produce enough intrinsic factor. So even if their food contains B12, they do not have enough intrinsic factor to absorb it from the food, right? And of course, people with gastric bypass or gastric stapling, they also have a problem with intrinsic factor. So in those cases, it's common that vitamin B12 is given as injections. So directly it is injected into the bloodstream. In this kind of anemia, the developing erythrocytes are large and pale, called as macrocytes. So here it was microcytes, and here they are called as macrocytes. They are much larger in size. Abnormal hemoglobin, there are genetic disorders like thalassemia and sickle cell anemia. Thalassemia is one either alpha or beta chains, globin chains are completely faulty. So in some cases, they may have all the four chains which are faulty. Very common is in the people of Mediterranean descent. The most severe form, which has all the four globin molecules faulty, is called as Cooley's anemia. Sickle cell anemia is where you have amino acids, you have chain of 287 amino acids, and one amino acid among that is different, just one, and that causes the cells to become sickle shaped. So instead of normal cell, they're like this. So the oxygen carrying capacity becomes much lower. Now you all know what is this, right? This is a neutrophil, and you can also see the platelets here. You can see the red blood cells, and you can also see the sickle cell. Okay. This is polycythemia, where you have excess red blood cells, and that causes the blood to thicken. Could be because of bone marrow cancer. Blood doping also is part of polycythemia, but that would be a secondary polycythemia. when less oxygen is available or APA production increases for some reason. So severe polycythemia is treated by drawing blood out and replacing by saline solution. Okay, so I'm going to stop it here and then start the next video.